Hello, and thank you for joining us for Vermont Film Essentials. My name is David Metzger.
I'm Lincoln L. Hayes. This week we're talking about Midnight Cowboy. This was my first viewing of Midnight Cowboy.
Sweet.
When did you first see this película?
It's funny because it was on the AFI list that my friend and I went through and tried to watch everything. I know we didn't watch it in that chunk, so I'm still not sure if I watched it senior year of high school before I went to college, or if I watched it the first year of college. Right. I just know that I saw it and I was like, huh.
Yeah.
And it was always one of those movies that I saw and it had an impact. Like I saw it and was like, wow, that was a lot, and liked it. But then it wasn't until in college we did a screening. I think we did like these curated screenings of films based on classes that were happening that semester.
Yeah.
So they did a New York, a class about New York, and they were going to do a field trip to New York City and see all the sights and everything. So we thought, why not show the movie that makes you just want to go to New York City?
Yeah.
And Midnight Cowboy. So we watched that, and it wasn't until that screening where I watched it and was like, this is a really, really good movie. It's uncompromising in a way that it's like, could only be made in 1969, has that 1970s feeling to it that I loved. Like those movies, the first time I saw them, they felt real, they were gritty, they were raw, they were unlike anything else I'd ever seen. So there was that, and I don't know, it's one of my favorite movies, and I look at it, I see it as a very endearing, beautiful love story in the way that Brokeback Mountain is a tragic love story, Titanic, or any of that. And I know that usually gets, really? Or, but I know there's a lot of weirdness and strange imagery to it, and
Definitely.
The first act is really like you have to kind of get through it.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of imagery, and there's like so much thrown at you that you're like, I don't know.
Do I know what's happening right now?
But then once it settles into the relationship between Dustin Hoffman and John Voight, like that's where the movie just kind of becomes a movie for me, and that's like the part of the movie that I love the most.
Yeah.
But even when you get through the movie, when you go back and watch it a couple more times, those weird psychological flashes make up a story and make sense. And they're not as jarring as they are the first time you see it.
Right. I feel like I need multiple viewings of this film to fully appreciate its full scope, because my initial response too was, what's going on? This is a lot of like frenetic energy and a lot of images, and what does it mean? What does this mean to the character? What does it mean to the overarching story? But yeah, their relationship comes through right to the forefront of, this is about the relationship between these two men. Is it a sexual relationship? Is it a friendship? Is it more than friendship? Is he just being used by Ratso? Is Ratso actually using him for, he knows he's on his way out, so he wants a friend kind of thing? Like, there's a lot to unpack in this movie. And then there are the weird flashes in the beginning of the TV channels, and his relationship with his grandmother, and then the rape, and then when they go to that trippy party and there's all that stuff going on. And it is very late 60s, early 70s New York, and it feels gritty and gross and nasty. And this is, I think, only a few years before Death Wish. I can't remember, I think that's 74.
Yep.
But I always think of like the 70s into the 80s as the time in New York that I did not ever want to live there, because it's just, there's crime, there's drugs, there's, Times Square is just full of prostitution and sex theaters, and it's just nasty. And sure, Giuliani comes in and Disneyfies it all and makes it all safe and clean, but I mean, that's the New York that I lived in, so that's the New York that I like. And you see it back then, you're just like, no thanks. I don't want to get off a bus there and walk around. I don't want to be anywhere near where they end up living in this tenement that's going to be condemned and torn down and all that stuff. But it feels very real. And you believe every second of it. There's never a moment where you're like, that's a set or that's a sound stage. I mean, so much so that I read that the tenements that they looked at when they were like researching the set design, they were old buildings that were going to be condemned. They actually took doors and furniture from them and used them on set. So some of that is from actual condemned buildings in New York City.
And it feels it. Like it's one of the first movies that, just from a photographic standpoint, showed the city in all of its gritty realism.
Yeah.
To the point where you can, like, when they're in that building, it's like you can smell it. You know exactly what it smells like, and it's not good.
He actually says to him, "You stink.
Yeah.
You need to take a shower." And it's like, yeah. Or they're sleeping on those pillows, and you're like, "Don't put your face on those pillows." Ugh.
And I think with these 70s films, as I'm watching them more and more, and as we're watching them for the show, and I'm kind of looking at them, when I first saw them, it has the feeling of, oh, they just went to an actual location and shot it, or, you know, these performances are so real and gritty. It's just they just showed up and they're just being as real as possible.
And some of the street stuff is that.
But then the more you watch it, the more, like, Dustin Hoffman's performance, I always, like, if you're going to talk about Dustin Hoffman just as an actor, it's like, look at The Graduate and then look at this. They're miles apart.
So much so that Mike Nichols actually went to him and said, "What are you doing?
Don't do this.
This film will ruin your career."
And it's so amazing, like, you know, it is a larger than life, over the top character. He's got this crazy walk that he does, which he put
rocks in his shoes.
I mean, and then he's got this way
Ugh.
that he talks, and the way his hair is, and the way he dresses, and, you know, everything is a decision and everything is a distinct choice. And it's very easy to look at that and say, oh, it's like he's not doing anything.
Right.
But it's not about being like, if you were just going to show up and be yourself, that would be boring, right?
Yeah.
But he's making all these choices and they all just fit, and there's never a moment where you feel like, oh, he's playing a caricature of somebody. Like, you know, you watch this performance, you're like, I just passed that guy in the city. Like, I know that. And that's another great thing about this movie, is it just takes these two characters that, and this is really like the one great thing that a film can do, is that it just takes these two characters that you never would want to associate with or run into, and just follows them for a whole movie and studies them in such a way that by the end of the movie, like, you feel so much for them. You know, that the ending on a bus is like just about as emotional a scene as you can imagine.
Similar to The Graduate, interestingly enough. Yeah, John Voight's performance is fantastic in this, both of them. John Voight is a native Yonkers, New Yorker. So there was worry whether or not he could pull off the Texas accent, which he worked very hard to achieve, and he does a great job at it. And then Dustin Hoffman's just this slimy, filthy, sleazy guy, and you buy it. You buy it. I mean, there's no question in your mind that this is a real person. And then just like them walking around the city, and, you know, Voight's tall, Hoffman's short. It's just this great image. I mean, it's right there on the box. It's just, you can't have this movie without the two of them.
No.
They sell this movie in spades. It's their performances are so great. And, you know, if it were a romantic comedy, they're meet cute when they meet in this sleazy bar, and, you know, he finds out that he's a hustler, and he's like, oh, okay, I'm going to get in touch with this guy, and then he cons him. but then they still find each other. In a city of 6 million people, he still finds Ratso. They're supposed to be together. They're supposed to be a team, both for his attempt at hustling, but also kind of to save Ratso. And it's tragic. It's so sad.
I love that it's, you know, they have their meet cute, they're in the bar, and he just sees him as, oh, here's my next target. But then, so that happens, and then, you know, a little bit of time passes in the film, and he's just kind of like wandering aimlessly, and he's looking at a diner, and there's food, and he wants the food, and then all of a sudden he sees that he's there, and his first reaction is to wave at him, like, oh my God, it's someone I know.
Yeah.
But then he's like,
wait,
you
took
screwed
money.
me.
Yeah.
And do you know the story about how John Voight was cast?
Tell me.
So Dustin Hoffman was cast first, and then the director, John Schlesinger, comes to him and he says, you know, it's down to 3 people, and I want you to look at the tapes and make your decision who you think the best Joe Buck would be. And Dustin Hoffman's like, I don't want to be put in that position to, you know, to choose one actor over the other. But he watches the tapes, and you know, he does the screen test with each of the 3 actors, and he's like, they're all good, but I'll tell you the one, you know, this John Voight, like, he's the one, when he's on screen with me, I look at him, I don't look at myself. And the other 2 actors, I'm looking at myself and what I'm doing and kind of studying it and getting caught up in it. And he's like, so this is the guy here, like, I'm drawn to him. So John Schlesinger said, okay, he's the guy. And, you know, God, it works. They're such, like, they're opposites just from, you know, looking at them. You know, if you're going to be telling a sort of love story, a buddy film, they are a perfect couple. And they got this chemistry. Like, it's hard to classify this film, but because there's so much funny stuff in there, and kind of like what we were talking about with like Last Picture Show, it's like there's these lines where you hear them and you laugh, but then like the next, like 5 seconds later, you're like, ah, that's so sad.
Yeah.
You know, the orange juice on ice sequence when he's dancing, like, that's that all over, because you watch it and it's funny. It's funny what he's doing. It's funny that he's dancing the way he's dancing.
Right.
But then you look at it and you're like, it's so tragic.
He's dying, and they're freezing in this pile of garbage that is an apartment building.
And then I've never been invited to a party.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that line stings. But I love all of the stylistic choices that this movie makes. You know, even as jarring as they are and as confusing as they are at first, those little flashes. It's kind of it's a perfect study as to how you do flashbacks, or if you're going to flash to different, you know, whatever they are, psychological flashbacks or whatever. You know, it's a study in how to do it, because, you know, there's a rule of thought that the best way to do that is, the original person who said it was, they should be on a train, because then you have a moving image, and then all of a sudden, you know, you have a flashback. So he's on a bus, and it works. You know, he's driving on the bus, and then all of a sudden you hear what he's hearing in his head, and then we're just flashing to all these little vignettes, and at first you have no idea what's going on, but the more that you watch it, it's that, you know, his parents died, he was taken in by his grandmother had all of these suitors that came. The suitors were cowboys, and he psychologically put together sex and cowboys. And then falls in love with what he thinks is his high school sweetheart, and ends up being the high school, sorry for lack of a better word, the high school slut. And, you know, just buys into all of the lines that she's feeding him, that he's the best, he's the only one, and blah, blah, blah. So then gets into his head that he's going to go to New York City and he's going to be a hustler.
Yeah.
And he's going to be a male prostitute, and he's going to, you know, he's going to make so much money, it's just going to be coming out of his ears. But then he gets there, and it's like, you know, the city just chews him up and spits him out.
Yeah.
And even like, you know, he's walking around, and it doesn't take that long before he thinks he has a customer, and then the customer takes him.
Which is one of the, like, that's the first tragedy of the film, where you're just like, oh man, your first client, you end up paying her.
Right.
So she probably took you the whole time, because she lives in this penthouse. She doesn't need your money, but she saw you as a rube, so she got 20 bucks out of you.
And that's the other thing, like the three ways that this film, you know, I continue to watch it, it continues to inspire me, is one, the screenplay by Waldo Salt. It's such a, at first glance, you know, it seems to have no structure to it. There's all these flashes that don't seem to add up or make sense. And then kind of by the second act, it kind of settles into a story. You'd never, ever say that this movie is formulaic or, you know, follows a traditional 3-act structure. But the more that you uncover, the more that it does. Like his character is so, you know, his flaw is that he is naive.
Yeah.
He is young, he is brash, he is stupid, and he has this dream. He has this dream that he wants. And as foolhardy as it is, he's got that, you know, he's endearing to us because he's just so enthusiastic and so
he's got gumption,
innocent about it. But then he gets there, and it's like, you know, that's a perfect scene of setting up his character flaw and how that's going to get into his way every step of the way of this film, is that, what do you mean I'm going to pay you money?
Yeah.
And then, you know, I need money for a cab. Well, you know, here, you know, how much would you need? How much would you need?
Yeah.
You know, just stop crying.
Yeah.
You know, I can't stand it when you cry. And then ends up, you know, 20.
Broke. Yeah.
And
that's,
you know,
all the money he had.
That's the movie. And then out of the ether comes this complete opposite character to him, and somehow they end up being perfect for each other.
Yeah.
And they end up needing each other to survive in that broken house. And then he's sick, he's dying, he's got to get to Florida. Now he's got to find a way to get to Florida. And, you know, it's just such a well-structured screenplay, in the fact that getting these two characters together and then setting up situation after situation where, one, his flaw is getting the best of him, but two, you know, he's got to overcome that to help his friend.
Right.
So his heart is still in the right place, but he finally is able to go to that dark place where he can do the rough stuff to get his friend to Florida to save his life.
Because he is on track. He's on track to actually achieving his hustler dreams. Like he gets with the woman at the party, she hooks him up with another friend of hers, she pays him, so he's like, I'm doing this, and then he gets home and he finds Ratso is on death's door. He's been sick this whole time, but of course they're ignoring it because they're tough guys and they're in New York and whatever, it's just a cough. And he has to make a choice in that moment. He's like, do I pursue my dream or do I take care of my friend? And he does the noble thing and takes care of his friend. And then in doing that, once we get him to Florida, he changes. His arc has now come to a new place where he loses his costume. He doesn't need to be a cowboy anymore because he has this friend. And it kind of makes you wonder what happens once he gets to Miami. It's also tragic that he has to ride the rest of the way with him just sitting there. I feel like something could be done. Can we not call somebody, a cop or an ambulance or something? But no, we'll just keep driving. Don't worry about that. And it's so tragic. It's for a movie that I'm walking here bit, and John Voight's character is bigger than life and brash and all this stuff. It's really sad.
It takes you for a big journey. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I know a person that has not watched this film, got to the end of it, and not been affected by that final scene.
Yeah.
And there are, the three biggest moments for me is, one, him throwing out the cowboy gear, mm-hmm. Him finally putting his arm around Dustin Hoffman at the end, and then closing his eyes. And it's, he's not the naive guy that from the beginning.
Right.
He's been through something, and it is triumphant in the way that you feel like he's ready for life now.
Yeah.
You feel like he is ready to, take on whatever is going to be
he's
thrown
changed.
at
He's
him.
metamorphosized. He's no longer the caterpillar. He has become the butterfly, and his eyes are open, and he sees the world much bigger. But it makes you wonder then what happens after he gets to Miami. Like I was saying.
Now he's stuck in Miami.
Does he continue trying to be a hustler in Miami? Does he give it up and do something else? We don't know anything about Joe Buck other than he was a dishwasher in a restaurant, mm-hmm. and he thinks he's good at sex.
Mm-hmm. The only thing we know about Joe Buck is what Joe Buck told us.
Exactly.
So now he's
a blank slate.
He's someone else.
He can be anything he wants.
Mm-hmm.
He can be a real cowboy if he wanted to, but he's in Florida now, so probably not. Dustin Hoffman, method acting. This is our second Dustin Hoffman film that we've done. And this dude, props for going the extra mile, but also, come on, it's exhausting to think about the lengths that method actors go to when they very easily could do half of it, and we would all buy it. And they're doing it as much for themselves to inhabit the role and embody the character fully so that they give us the best performance. Mm-hmm. But half the time you're just like, you don't need to put rocks in your shoes, Dustin. You can just remember how you walked. And that's why he does it. He's like, well, I put it in there so I would walk the same way every time. It's like, how hard is it to remember how to walk in character? You're an actor. It's part of your work. It's what you do. And then the way that have you heard the story of how he auditioned for the role?
Oh, yeah. I got it.
So he auditions, he contacts the producers, and he sets up an audition for them. But rather than meeting somewhere to read for the part, he wants to meet them on a street corner in Manhattan. So the producer's standing there waiting for him, looking around, can't find him anywhere. It isn't until 10 minutes later that he realizes that there's this homeless person over there begging money from people. And he kind of catches, all right, there's somebody over there. And then that guy walks up to him, and he's like, hey, it's me. Why? Okay, yeah, great job. You convinced this guy that you can disappear in a crowd. And part of it was because he'd just come off The Graduate, and they would be filming scenes on the street, and girls would be screaming at him, oh, it's Dustin Hoffman.
Right.
So that's him being like, I can disappear into this role, and you won't see that character anymore. You'll just see Ratso. And come on, dude. Just, if you weren't Dustin Hoffman, that would be crazy.
Right.
If you weren't as famous as you are, and if you weren't as good as you are, that would be crazy. You would be one of the crazy actors that people talk about. But instead, you're also great, so then it's all right. It's such a strange double-edged sword for me as a performer, too. It's just like, is that what I got to do? Do I have to dress in rags to audition for this movie, or can I just go in and read the part like I'm trained to do? I don't know. And then you hear other stories of him in different movies, and you're just like, man, you're crazy. Also in this film, he has the cough throughout. At one point, he made himself cough so hard that he actually vomited. Come on, dude.
I feel like so many of the actors like Dustin Hoffman and Pacino and De Niro and, you know, maybe Jack Nicholson, I don't know. I've never really heard a story about what his method truly was. But I feel like so many of them were they bought into the legacy of Marlon Brando so much so that they just like, you know, they needed to emulate that.
Yeah.
Like that was their, you know, their cloud that they wanted to get to. And, you know, I feel like so much of it is, one, you look at the performance and you're like, all right, so it's a great performance and I believe it so much. So did all of that stuff equate to that?
Exactly.
Or is it just about them saying like, you know, intense focus,
I did the work.
Intense realism, I did that, now am I Brando? Can I call myself Brando now?
Exactly.
So, and you know, the director of me just wants to be like, well, you know, whatever works for you.
Yeah. I'm the same. That's why I'm torn too, because it's like, I mean, whatever gets the job done, but at the same time, as an actor, I'm like, stop making us all look bad. Anybody could, let me rephrase. Nearly any actor could also play this part and do a serviceable job. Would they have done the same job as he did in this film? That's impossible to say because no one else has. Mm-hmm. It's the old argument of, you know, oh, well, if you did that, then this would never happen. Well, that's not, no one can know that. It's paradoxical time travel stuff.
Yeah.
And then you have John Voight opposite him, who's not doing any of that stuff and also doing a fantastic job and working so well with him. So, which school of thought do you work in?
And I feel like that was, you know, that was one of the things that in watching some of the documentaries that are on this DVD and that I've seen over the years, it's like that also added to their chemistry because he was, you know, John Voight was looking at Dustin Hoffman and being like, you're nuts. And
what are you doing right now?
And Dustin Hoffman would be like, hey, come on, we gotta, you know, let's sit down and let's kind of go through this and let's improv some stuff. And John Voight's like, all right. And they came to kind of like a middle ground understanding because Voight says that, you know, I never would have been able to do those scenes if it wasn't for Dustin being there and kind of guiding me through it and helping me and you know, feeding me these lines and making me come up with stuff where I don't even know where it came from.
Right.
That's where you get like, you know, there's scenes, there's dialogue that they say to each other where you know, you can't write that. It's got to be them just riffing off of each other. And that's what kind of adds to that authenticity too. Even the infamous scene, you know, there's no one knows the truth, as everything that is great in movies. It comes out and it's like, you know, someone that was on the set said, no, that was in the script. Dustin Hoffman maintains that, you know, no, that was, you know, it happened.
As does John Voight.
So, but the one thing for me is like, you know, if that was, if the person that was on the set is correct in saying that, no, that was in the script and we planned that, he would never break character the way he does. His voice changes and you hear Dustin Hoffman. Like you hear him saying, like, I'm walking here. Nobody talks to me like that. And then he starts walking again, and he's like, he starts back into Ratso Rizzo. So I mean, if he was going to yell in character, it would sound like Ratso Rizzo yelling. Right. You know, hey, I'm walking here. Like it would sound like that. It wouldn't sound like Dustin Hoffman. So that's why I feel like, you know, as much as someone wants to take it away from Dustin Hoffman, is he's just saying that he made it up because he thinks he makes everything up. Right. I
also watch John Voight in that scene.
Right. He's like, what the hell?
He's like, oh, that cab almost hit us.
Right.
And then the driver of the cab too If that's a picture car, there is no way that guy is going to yell at Dustin Hoffman the way that he does, because that guy will be fired. You don't get to talk. You don't get to talk to the principals that way. You don't even get to talk to the principals unless they talk to you. But if you make a mistake like that, I was on a set once. Here's a fun tangent story. I was doing extra work on Lipstick Jungle, I believe, a now defunct Brooke Shields ABC show. And we were doing this scene on the street, and Kim Raver was in the scene from 24 and Grey's Anatomy, things of that nature. And she's standing there talking to one of the other actors in the scene, and an extra walking by runs into her, oh, so sorry, and then walks away. But like, we had done it several times, and he had never crossed that path. She wasn't moving, obviously, she was on her marks, but this guy just did it completely wrong and ran into her during the scene. So then, you know, he clears frame, she kind of reacts to it, and then it's over, and they all cut, and that guy got a stern talking to from one of the ADs, the second AD as they're known, who was just like, what are you doing? Why did you do that? Just do what we had you do the first time. Don't move from your marks. Don't do that. Don't run into the actors. What is wrong? Like, it was a big deal. And we're like, you know, the scene is here, and we're all off on the sides just passing by. And as soon as that happens, the rest of us extras were just like, why? Why did you just do that? What just happened? And then they yell cut, and we're, and he didn't get fired or anything, but he got like ripped for it, because just do what you're supposed to do. So if a car almost hits Dustin Hoffman and John Voight, the leads of this movie, that's not an accident. I mean, that's not. The way that it all goes down, that had to be an accident.
Right. And I love that Schlesinger leaves it in.
Oh, yeah.
I love that he says, I don't care if he broke character, I don't care if it doesn't make sense in the... I need this moment in my movie. Because it does, like, it adds to the story that you're telling about this city, you know, just...
It'll run you over.
And yeah, and it's just there. Like, that's a director, like, being so into just knowing so much the story that he's telling, that he's just looking for those little accidents and happy moments that he can just take and say, nope, it's there.
Yep.
Speaking of that, like the stylistic choices of this movie, it's, you know, there's one way you can look at it as the party scene, the kind of Andy Warhol psychedelic drug thing. There's one way you can look at it and say, well, that scene dates this movie, like, because, you know, there's only one time that could happen,
the
right?
60s.
But there's also another way of, like, you know, it's just a movie just rolling around in the muck of the times that it was made in. And, you know, if this was made today, there is our form of that Andy Warhol party going on right now in some city that would be in this movie.
Of course.
And, you know, it's just so trippy, man. Like, there's so many moments where you're just like...
And the fact that we change styles, too. We go from
it cuts
the actual film camera to that weird artist's 16 millimeter or whatever he's using. And it's subtle enough that you don't really notice it, particularly in the scene when Dustin Hoffman is very uncomfortable. He's like, don't touch me, stop touching me. You don't realize that that is the handheld camcorder at first. And you're like, because he keeps looking into the lens, and you're like, oh. And then it clicks, and you're like, oh, okay, we've shifted now, and now we're seeing their story from yet another perspective that's not their own. It's genius. And then, of course, you know, the drugs come out, and then everybody's naked, and all kinds of stuff is going on, and you're just trying to get through all of that to pay attention to what's going on, and that's exactly what's happening with the characters. They're so lost in this new world that for Rizzo is scary, and he doesn't want to be a part of it. Also, he's sick and he's dying and all that other stuff, whereas Joe is all for it. He's like, this is the New York that I was ready for. Let's do it. And that's why it ultimately works out better for him than it does for Ratso.
And that's the tragedy of their relationship is that, within the confines of this dilapidated house, they can interact and they can be with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But
They can be equals.
But we go out into the world and it's like one wants this, the other can't
Do any of
be
that.
that,
Yeah.
and has to run away from it.
Mm.
And even though when he goes to, Ratso's going to help him, he's going to be his manager, and they're at that hotel and Ratso is standing outside and watching him go in, and then we have this this dream sequence of him on the beach in Florida. And it's like this strange line between funny and heartbreakingly real. Is like, he just wants to run on the beach with his friend.
Yeah.
He just wants to see sunshine.
And
he wants to eat an orange.
You look at all of the things that he ends up doing in this dream sequence, and most of them are for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's leading bingo. He's sampling all the food so everybody can have the buffet. It's not all that selfish. It's not like I'm doing this for my own good. He's doing it to elevate his station so that he can provide for other people and provide entertainment. That's all he wants to do. Yep. And that scene is the turning point for his character where he becomes endearing. Because up until then, he's just this filthy con man. And you're like, why would you even bother with him? But then you see that and you're like, oh. And he's never going to get it either. It's kind of like a trope of films that if somebody has that serious of a cough, they're not going to survive.
Right.
They're dead by the end of the movie. I mean, take it from Victorian things. It's like, oh, I have a cough, and then you see blood, and then they have tuberculosis,
That's
and they're
TB.
dead. Yeah. To the point now where you see anybody cough up blood, it's like, TB. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know that, someone else around you does,
right.
And they're like, that's TB. They're going to die. And then they do. So he has this dream that he's never going to attain, but Joe's there with him because this is his only friend now. Mm-hmm. Because he's probably pushed everybody else in his life away, or they've all left because he's scuzzy, which was invented by this movie. The word scuzzy.
Scuzzy?
Yeah. Yeah. This is the only X-rated film to ever win Best Picture, to be screened on television, and to be screened by a sitting president. How about that?
And it's crazy to think, because now it's been re-rated R.
Yes.
And it doesn't have
2 years later it did.
And it doesn't have, the moniker that it had at the day. But yet it's still a movie that you sit down and watch and you're like, oh my God, this could have come out yesterday. This could have come out tomorrow. And it still has the same power. It still has the same crazy effect that it has.
Yeah.
But even at the time, like that it was rated X and then it went on to win the big trophy. Mm-hmm. No matter what you think about the Oscars, it's like, that's a big deal.
They recognized that it was an important piece of filmmaking.
And that was, it was like 1969. I've always maintained that if I was going to go back to any year in film, it would be 1969 because I just want to be there when Easy Rider came out and the culture just shifted
Changed.
and said, oh my God,
yeah,
it's this now.
Yeah.
Because at the Oscars, John Wayne was nominated for True Grit, and he was sitting next to Dennis Hopper, and then John Voight is sitting behind him, and they both got cowboy hats on, and they're both in these movies that have, cowboy-like connotations to them, but are just so drastically different than anything that John Wayne would be doing. And it was like this big culture shift.
Yeah.
And then that they get up and they take that Oscar. And I believe
it's interesting they poke fun at John Wayne in this film. Like, well, why are you dressed like that? Well, John Wayne dresses like this. And then John Wayne wins Best Actor that year for True Grit over both of them, both nominated. Also, much later, revealed that John Wayne was actually homosexual. So, like, it was probably a comment on the time of being like, hey, we know this about John Wayne, but we're just going to put it out there as like, no way, what? And then it turns out to be the truth. because that's also the crazy dichotomy of John Wayne as a person, was that he was this tough guy cowboy in all of his movies, but he didn't want to be that in real life.
Right.
He wanted to wear nice suits and be, you know, kind of like a proper gentleman.
Well, and also like even if you look at his films, he's not that much of the tough guy that everyone thinks.
Right.
You know, the image that everyone has of him. I mean, he's much more human than that, even in his films. So that always confused me. But
it's times, man. You see this big strapping guy and he's a cowboy. You're not listening to what he's saying. You're not actually paying attention to the movie. You're just seeing a tough cowboy. And you're like, yeah, I want to be tough like that. And then you listen to him or you see any of the movies and like pay attention, like his character arcs and stuff, and you're like, wow, this is a tragic figure. Oof, this is very sad. But you're not going to pay attention to that because you're a tough guy. You're a tough guy.
Never realized John Wayne walked like that. All the language of this film, and like there's such a, you know, whether it's a friendship or there is a homoerotic undertone to it, that is never, it's never done in such a way to say whether it is or not.
Right.
It's always just right there underneath the surface. And John Schlesinger himself was a homosexual, and he just was like, I want to get, you know, I don't need this to be a gay film. I just need it to be that it could be, or that, you know, it's not so crazy an idea that it is. And, you know, there's moments where the negative words are thrown around, but you never get it. You never get that it's done in a sensationalist way of saying like, I'm just using this word because it's just so cool and so fierce to use this word.
Right. It's the late '60s. Right. That's what you said.
And it's also used as, you know, I'm calling you the thing that
I'm afraid of.
Right.
Yeah.
Or that I'm afraid of myself.
Right. I'm projecting this onto
as
you.
One, so I'm going to use the word to deflect it.
Exactly. And that happened. It still happens. People still do that. I also read that I don't think it was ever shot, but there was a love scene scripted between the two of them that he ended up cutting out of the film. And to the film's credit and to his credit, I think that was a wise move, because you could label this as a gay movie, but it isn't really. It's a friendship movie. It's about two men who are friends. And could their love be more than that? Maybe. You need to ask them. It's not out there. Right. It's ingrained in these two men that, yes, they probably do love each other because they care for each other and they're taking care of each other. And, you know, he's sick and he's providing for him and he's helping him try to achieve his dreams. And in the end, we have the beautiful moment with them in the bus. And I don't, as a straight white guy, I don't watch that and go, oh, gay. I go, oh, that's beautiful.
Right.
And I don't know if I don't think that I'm supposed to see this as a gay film. Like he says, it's like, I'm not making a gay film. And that, I feel like, is the difference between this and a Brokeback, where it is a homosexual relationship that they're having. That's implied in this. I think Brokeback just takes it to that next level and is like, and they consummate that love for each other. And I think that keeps this movie accessible for anybody who's unsure about movies like Brokeback. So I think that keeps this movie, I mean, right here on the back of the box it said it stands the test of time. And I think that is perfectly apt. This movie is timeless. Yes, it's set in '69 and it's New York in the '60s, but these people still exist. You could very easily remake this movie or some variation of it, of small town hick comes to New York to try to do this thing. New York, you know, small time con sees him, and then they become unlikely friends. How many times has that happened?
And I feel like today, I fear that today, if it was made, it would be watered down or changed for the, like, because there's scenes in this film where, like the scene in the movie theater with a young Bob Balaban.
Film debut, Mr. Balaban.
It's so real and awkward.
Yeah.
And in a way that you're just like, wow, like I've never seen a scene like this before, done this way, even now.
Yeah.
Same for the scene when Ratzower tells him that the guy, go see him, he's going to set
Mr.
you
Daniel,
up.
yeah.
And what that ends up being, and how crazy it is, and how
I had no idea where that
funny,
scene was going.
right?
It was so uncomfortable. And then he's like, let's get on our knees. And you're like, what? What? And then he opens the door and he's got this, giant monument of Jesus and stuff. And you're like, what's going on?
And he's so he's so crazy. That was the J. Lewis Reed who played Baxter in Northland. I told him to watch that scene.
Yeah.
I said, just do that.
Speaking of that character, that actor John McGiver played Senator Thomas Jordan in The Manchurian Candidate, which we will be screening next week, Main Street Landing.
When I was talking about him, I just made that connection. I was like, ooh, I didn't even plan that.
And in the remake, John Voight plays Senator Thomas Jordan.
How's about that?
How about it? Small word. I read that and I was like, oh, well, I'll definitely write that down.
Yep.
How relevant. And then we see his first interaction with Mr. Daniel. Then we see him with the woman from the party where he has performance issues. And then we have the final scene with the man who picks him up that he ends up having to beat just to get enough money to get Ratso to Florida. We have such a journey of this character of naivete, somebody's going to help me. Oh, I don't know if this is actually what I want to do. Now I have to do this for my friend. I mean, is he going to let him die? That's such a hard moment for that character, because it's like, oh, I can continue on my way to substitute being, a male prostitute with being an actor or a musician or anything like that. Like, you're about to get your break, but your friend's going to die. What are you going to choose? And it's like, well, hopefully you choose saving your friend. But that means he has to beat up this old man.
There's so many.
It's tragic.
There's so many details of this movie that make each scene memorable or different, or just that far off kilter. So like with Bob Balaban, it's that he's got these big rimmed glasses, and with that guy at the end when he's beating him, it's like, and his false teeth fall out. And you're just like, whoa, like that.
Yeah. That moment was very surprising.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, wow. And you see how feeble he is and how easily he could take advantage of him, but he doesn't want to. That's why he's the hero of the piece, because he doesn't want to do any of the bad things that he needs to do, but he has to do them to save his friend.
And that is what, those types of things is what makes, it's like I don't watch this movie and I don't watch this and say, oh, I'm watching a movie. Like there's scenes like that where, like I feel like in any other movie that like that would happen, they'd say, oh, you can't do that. Like that's weird. Just let's do it again and not do that.
Yeah.
But he sees it and he's like, no, do that. Yeah. And the effect that has is when you're watching it, you're like, oh, this is real.
Yeah. His teeth just fell out.
Yeah. Like this is nah. I'm not watching a movie like a movie scene. I'm watching something that's really happening.
Similar moment. We just rewatched The Departed recently, and when he hits the guy in the face and knocks his teeth out.
Yeah.
That very easily could have just been, oh, some blood, whatever. But you go to that extra step and have teeth falling out, and that makes it real. This film is steeped in realism. Even with all the trippy psychedelic stuff, it's a very real film. And if you don't get that from it, then you're not paying attention.
And that's why, I think, like this will always be an influence of me, and like, of all the films of the '70s that I've seen and that I love and that I enjoy, this is one of those films that I just keep going back to. And when I was doing American Vinyl, like this movie, it showed me how to take a character that is beaten down or not a character that you'd want to see or want to root for, and find a way to track and follow with them. And it's hard because I went the other way with that movie. I didn't want to be as depressing as that movie. Like I kind of, I wanted to lead that to a more hopeful ending. But it was kind of like an inspiration for me as to how you do that and how you track a character like that. And then when I was doing I had Seth Cashman, who was doing the still photography for that movie, and he wanted to do the poster. And I gave him this poster, and I said, well, we're going to do something like that. So I'll put that up side by side because it's pretty cool what he did. Nice. But yeah, I mean, this movie, even recently with Northland, like showing that scene to that actor, is saying like I want it to feel like this. I want it to feel that weird and that crazy. Yeah. Like it'll always be a movie that I go back to just to say like, how do we be this real and how do we be this gritty?
This feels a lot like Rosemary's Baby for me, of movies that like, it almost feels weird saying that you like it because the subject matter isn't like a popcorn movie. Right. But it's a film study. Both of those films are, whether you are like, oh, it's my favorite movie, or if you're just, you should be able to appreciate what they are and how they are constructed and see that they are a step above most other films. Absolutely. And I've had this argument several times with Tim Bridge on the podcast of, is it a movie, like how do you rate a film? Is it how much you like it or how great of a film it is? And there are movies that aren't great films that I like a lot, so I'm going to give them a high rating, and he's always baffled by that. He's like, but this movie's terrible. And it's like, but I had fun watching it. You don't really have fun watching Midnight Cowboy. You're not sitting there going, oh, this is a great time. You're sitting there watching, oh man, this is a lot to unpack.
For how deeply involved you get with the characters and how deeply involved you get with the story.
You have an emotional response by the end of it.
Right. And, to go back to what we were saying before, where it's like you have these moments where it's like you're not watching a movie, you're watching something real and something else. So this year, 3 Billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, has that same type of feel to it. There's moments in that film where I felt like, oh my God, I'm watching something fierce from the 70s, like something Scorsese or even Schlesinger would do. And then there's moments where I felt like, oh, I'm watching a movie. Yeah.
And for me, there were too many movie moments. Right. And that took me out. So them winning all these awards and winning BAFTAs and everything else, I'm just like,
I'm torn because it's like I want Frances McDormand to get her due. I want to get her award. Like she carries that whole film. But yeah, I'm torn because it's like
there are a lot of great movies this year.
There are. I don't love it.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot, and I appreciate everything that is in it. But there's some things, and then there's people that see it and they're like, why don't you love it?
Well, I just told you why. We should wrap up because we have to talk about the screening. Yep. You can catch this right now, actually, on HBO and Cinemax. So if you have either of those, it's just there. And then it's all the usual places for $3 or $4. This is great. I didn't even get a look at the other disc on here, but if you can grab this collector's edition or even the Blu-ray, these types of films, especially from this era, it's worth shelling out and getting the Blu-ray because it's film school. Yes. In a box.
Especially since all the bonus material that you get with, like, there's 2 documentaries that are just, if I'm ever in a blind spot with writing or doing anything, like I'll watch the documentaries again just to kind of get that fever that you get from it. But especially from films from this era, it's like there's like the documentaries and the interviews that they can still get from the people that made the film. Yeah.
Most of these people are still around. Yeah. So you can go back and be like, what was it like working on that movie? And this is the era in where, we'd had 30, 40 years of filmmaking at that point, but we hadn't really been chronicling it yet. We hadn't really been documenting it yet. So the people in the 60s grew up watching movies and they wanted to learn more about it. And that became documentary filmmaking of like, all right, well, I want to interview this guy about how he made his movie because I love his movie so much. I love movies so much I want to make movies about movies. And thus, you have, all these people having the foresight to be like, shoot some stuff on set, do some still photography, like chronicle this so that we have a record of it. Yeah, it was a great time for filmmaking. Absolutely. Final thoughts. Urban Cowboy, one of your faves. Highly recommend.
Yep, absolutely. One of my faves. Still influential. You can still go back to it. It'll still make you throw your head back and go, "Holy cow! How did they make this?"
Yeah.
And it makes you want to figure out how they made it.
Right.
And it's one of those things where it's like, even after watching the documentaries, even after knowing how they made it and how they did certain things, and like the fact that they threw the long lenses on the cameras and they were able to get these shots in the city, basically stolen shots in the city.
Yeah.
Even knowing all of that, it doesn't take away from the effect of the film.
Right.
You're not watching it and saying like, "Oh, I'm too busy watching what lenses they're
Filmmaking,
using."
yeah.
It's great stuff.
Absolutely. I look forward to future viewings of it. It's definitely one that I've needed to see forever, and now that I have a much greater appreciation for it, because I've seen clips and retrospectives and stuff like that, but I haven't seen the whole film until now, and I need to sit with it. I definitely need to sit with it and think about everything that it is, because it's not just like an A to B to C. There's an entire world. It's an entire New York City to digest in this movie. So I look forward to doing that again in the future. Next Tuesday.
Okay, lots of stuff happening on Tuesday.
Yeah, it's a busy day.
Busy day.
So this episode will obviously come out next Wednesday. Next Tuesday, we will be in studio taping an episode on Manchurian Candidate with our guest, Nathan Hartswick, co-owner of Vermont Comedy Club. That evening, at 7 o'clock, Main Street Landing, we will be doing a screening of the Manchurian Candidate with the Main Street Landing film series, which we will be introducing, and then we were going to do a little bit of trivia, kind of Q&A thing after the screening as well. The event is on Facebook. You can find it through our Facebook page. If you're interested, it's free.
Best part about it is that it's free.
And we'll be there in our suits, looking dapper, talking about this great film, which I haven't seen.
And I can't wait to talk about it. I can't wait for you to see it for the first time.
I know, me too. All right. Any other business before we get out of here?
Nope.
Great. Like the Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, all that other good stuff. Come to the screening.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fun. Although by the time this airs, it'll already have happened. Great. Next week, Manchurian Candidate with Nathan and the screening. I'm very excited. All right. Until next time, I'm Lincoln L. Hayes.
I'm David Metzger.
See ya.